What's going on, students? This is Mr. McDonald here. As you can see, I wanted to do a video for you guys to assist with your learning on the Descartes homework on Descartes' um, Discourse on Method, so that you guys could have a little bit of a supplement if you're having trouble with the homework. And so let's just jump right in here and talk about what I assigned for you guys. So Descartes is a French mathematician, physicist, and philosopher who is known as essentially the father of modern philosophy. Now, he's not the father of ancient philosophy; that would probably be Socrates. But as the father of modern philosophy, he kind of created this new method, a new way of thinking about general philosophy. In this case, metaphysics and epistemology. So I wanted to intro you guys into some pretty high level thinking, and this is something I think that is great to think about, but it's also going to help us understand our concepts about God as we go on later. So let's take a look at it. This is an excerpt, which means it's just a small section of a larger body of work called the Discourse on Method. I also want to point out that this is a primary source. The primary source means that you went directly to the original source of the information. A secondary source would be someone who talks about the primary source. So this isn't someone giving a commentary on what Descartes said. This is actually what Descartes said. So you guys can hear it directly from the source. And it's a translation from the French, but I think that you guys are ready for this level of philosophy. So let's read it and see what we can glean from the text as far as understanding philosophy, shall we? All right, so let's read it together. He says, I don't know whether I should tell you the first meditations that I had there, for they are perhaps too metaphysical and uncommon for everyone's taste. So he's saying, I had a lot of thoughts at first, and I don't want to tell you about them because they're just too abstract. They're hard to think about. They're not what we normally talk about. But I have to report on them if you are to judge whether the foundations I have chosen are firm enough. So he's like, these are the foundations I picked for my philosophy, and I want you to understand the method that I chose so that you guys can see if you agree, or you can test it and see if it's firm, if it's something that you should believe. Said, I had long been aware that in practical life one sometimes has to act on opinions that one knows to be quite uncertain, just as if they were unquestionably true. I remarked on this above. So, what is he saying here? He knows that people have to act on things that they're not certain of, as if they were unquestionably true. And we're going to talk about this in class later, but essentially, if you think about it, you can't really be certain of anything. You would have to have 100% knowledge to be 100% certain of things. So there's always some room for doubt. With that being said, we act as if we can trust things 100%, because if we didn't, we would cease to exist. We would not be able to function in the world if we literally doubted every possible thing. The example that I'll give, and one of them that I give in class, is the light switch. When you press the light switch, you expect the light to go on. But there's any number of things that could go wrong that would prevent the light from going on. There's no guarantee that the light's going on, but you still press it and believe that the light's going to turn on. And we do this, a million times a day in a million different ways. But by pressing that light, you're actually essentially taking a step of faith. And in faith, you believe that pressing that switch is going to turn on that light. Now, you might have evidence to support it, which is fine, but it is still an act of faith. And I have a little PowerPoint on here that should demonstrate it, if I can get it up, but it doesn't want to get up. There we go. This is what it would look like. So a lot of things in life are uncertain. Almost everything is uncertain, but we gather evidence through logical reasoning. We're going to talk about this in class. I won't want to get too much into it, but based on the evidence, even though things are uncertain, we have to decide, do we choose to believe it and have faith, or do we choose to not believe it, or have negative faith or doubt? You have to pick. Descartes recognizes that no matter what, we have to just assume that things are unquestionably true if we're going to live a practical life. But that aside, he wants to set that aside. He says, but now I devote But now that I wanted to devote myself solely to the search for truth, which in this case would be 100% certainty, I thought I needed to do the exact opposite, to reject as if it were absolutely false everything regarding which I could imagine the least doubt. So, what he's saying here is in order to get to the truth, in order to get what you can actually really 100% believe, what he took was anything that you could possibly doubt, anything that you could question whatsoever, and he was going to act like it was false. And in doing so, he was going to come to, hopefully, the truth, right? As to see whether this left me with anything entirely indubitable to believe. So he's going to get rid of anything you can doubt and see if there's anything left. So reduce it down to the most common denominator, if you will. This is really, really smart. So, thus, I chose to suppose that nothing was such as our senses led us to imagine, because our senses sometimes deceive us. So think about things that you taste, touch, smell, and see and hear, because sometimes your senses deceive you. He was just going to assume that they're always wrong because you can doubt it, because maybe perhaps you saw something that you didn't really see, or you thought you heard something but it was different. He's going to just go ahead and throw that out. So no empirical, like, touching evidence is going to count. Nothing you touch, see, or taste. Okay, so that's all gone. It says, also I rejected as unsound the arguments I had previously taken as demonstrative, or very solid proofs, because some men make mistakes in reasoning, even in the simplest questions in geometry, and commit logical fallacies. And I judged that I was open to this as anyone else. So, assuming that other people make mathematical errors, even if the math is solid, even if 1 plus 1 equals 2, at some point someone will have made an error and said 1 plus 1 equals 3, or 1 plus 1 equals 11, like if you're one of my preschool girls. And so he's saying, because people can make those mistakes, I'm going to assume that I could make that mistake too. Therefore, I can doubt even the most simple logical proofs, which is math. So I'm just going to get rid of all that. So it gets rid of all of math and simple logic, right? And then he says, lastly, I decided to pretend that everything that had ever entered my mind was no more true than the illusions of my dreams, because all the mental states we are in while awake can also occur while we're asleep and we dream, without ever having any truth in them. So now we're back into metaphysics. Are we experiencing reality? He can doubt that because there's been times where he thought he was experiencing reality, but he was actually dreaming. And he woke up to find that the dream was not true. And I'm sure that you guys have had the same situation, as most people have. And so he basically is getting rid of even the experience that we're having right now, that you're watching a video. It's gone. He just erases all of it. So now we have basically all these things gone: logical thinking, and touch, taste, evidence, and his perception of reality. All that's gone. But follow this. This is what made Descartes genius and what made him famous. But no sooner had I embarked on this project than I noticed that while I was trying in this way to think everything to be false, it had to be the case that I, who was thinking, was something. And observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, was so firm and sure that not even the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics could shake it. So, what is a skeptic? A skeptic is someone who is prone to doubt. Even with evidence, they're still prone to doubting instead of having faith that something is true. So, all that being said, the idea that he existed, he could not get rid of. He could not get rid of. It was super solid that no one could doubt it. And he explains why. I decided that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy of what I was seeking, right? So the first thing is I exist. And I know that I exist because I'm thinking. Then I looked carefully into what I was. I saw that while I could pretend I had no body, and that there was no word and no place for me in, I still couldn't pretend that I didn't exist. I saw, on the contrary, that from the mere fact that I thought about doubting the truth of other things, it followed quite evidently and certainly that I existed. Whereas had I merely stopped thinking altogether, or stopped the mental state, even if everything else I had ever imagined had been true, I would have no reason to believe that I existed. So, follow. Because I'm doubting my own existence, I'm proving that I exist. Because as long as I can doubt it, I'm thinking. And as long as I'm thinking, I am something. I don't have to have a body for it. I don't have to have anything else around. Nothing else has to be real. Excuse me. Except for the fact that I'm thinking. So he's come to one absolute proof, one thing he can know for certain before anything else. One thing he can know for absolute certain, which is this: he exists. And this is without a question certain and therefore reality and true. So there's a term for this. This idea that I think, therefore I exist, is what is called an axiom, which means that it is the most basic form of accepted truth. There's nothing that can prove it. It kind of proves itself, or it is self-evident. And these are vocabulary words that I want us to know. So let's make sure that we get them down. And they are here for you as well. And we're going to take notes on these in class, but this might help you with your homework. Something that is self-evident is a proposition that is known to be true or by understanding its meaning without proof. So in other words, 1 plus 1 equals 2. You don't really need to prove it. There's no way to prove it. It's true because it's true. Ordinary human reason. Another example is one's belief that oneself is conscious is offered as an example of self-evidence. This is Descartes, essentially. So he's thinking, therefore he's conscious. If you're thinking about being conscious, it's proof that you're conscious. So you don't have to prove it. It's already proved because it exists. That means it's self-evident. It's evidence of itself. And axiom is the same thing. It's an indemonstrable first principle. So it's like it's like the common denominator of all things. It's like the most basic level of reason or rule, or it's a maxim that is found general acceptance or is thought worthy of common acceptance. So for example, nothing can be and both not be at the same time. So this phone can't exist and not exist at the same time. They just exist, right? So that is what an axiom is, and that's what it means to be self-evident. So I have that for your notes. And is that the end of it? So this taught me that I was a substance whose whole essence or nature was simply to think. So now if we're looking at what a person is or what does reality mean, we can at least deduce it down to the point where you are a created entity for the process of thinking. So now you kind of have like a purpose or something to do, right? And this substance of thinking doesn't necessarily need any place or depend on any material thing that we can think of, at least, in order to exist. Accordingly, this is me, this soul that makes me what I am is entirely distinct from the body. It's easier to know than the body and would still be just what it is if the body didn't exist. So he's saying there has to be a soul that's separate from the body. So like if you cut your arms off, you aren't the arm. You are just the thinking part of you. Very interesting stuff. So there you have it. That is just a small section. We're going to go over just after this. He has another portion where he proves the existence of God, and we're going to talk about that in Unit 2. But for now, there you have Unit 1 on the existence of God. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope that helps you with your homework.